Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Devlog 2. Some things to quickly note. Um, we're starting off like this. Honestly, the background for the wallpaper I'm using, you can find it online. Top something best animated. All of them are animated. You can easily find it. It's just something to look at for the time being. At least for me, it's nice. I like it. But anyway, that's not the main point. This is the second video or attempt for the devlog. Okay, as I mentioned, this is pretty much my second attempt doing the second devlog. I Game Maker just updated, so there's a lot of differences, or a decent amount of differences the last time I launched it. So I just kind of got bitch slapped by that. This is, of course, the first day of September. The last time I did anything for the video was in late October. Just to kind of get an idea, it's been over a month. I've been focusing on specifically Arc Knights because Arc Knights decided to do just continuous content, and I was having a hard time with lots of different things like the internet. So, lovely. The main point of me redoing this video is because I wanted to make this at least digestible and not all over the place. The biggest issue was I just needed to script this out and then go for each line so I don't go all over the place. That's like literally the biggest issue compared to the first version. If you guys are interested in the first version, I could release it, but do note it does have some things that I am leaving out. It's just all over the place. There's a lot of things I wanted to mention that I did not really get around to that I did want to mention. On just the top of the fact that there's so much to the game that I have left you guys in the dark that will probably never really be on the surface unless I dedicate a huge amount of time to talk about every single little nook and cranny after a certain point, which I probably won't. Anyway, so that out of the way, the fact that Game Maker has updated and I had to go out of my way to open up the project, this is completely new. So we're just gonna have this in the background for now. Um, Especially the errors thing, I'm gonna have to look into why it's freaking the fuck out, because there's a reason why I have it a certain way, especially if I've done the tutorial, unless they have changed some things in the background where that is not applicable, which just possibly creates more headaches and more things for me to do. We'll see. This is kind of the thing with a continuously updating thing that you hope you don't change enough to fuck people around, but you probably will at the end of the day. Maybe. Generally, warnings, with the way it's set up, this shouldn't be an issue, but it is kind of annoying seeing warnings. I think that's just because of the whole output window deal that they're doing. So like there is warnings, but that's mostly tied to. Even though I didn't want to really talk about this, it's done in the tutorial for Game Maker for the RPG, action RPG, where you're essentially carrying data to something else so that it can be persistent. So you can continuously use that data throughout the game, like the level, the stats, and whatnot. Uh, I think if you go back to the tutorial, you'll understand. I won't really go too much into specific things from the tutorial that I already haven't done already yet. Uh, it's just, I think you could just watch the tutorial itself if you really have any questions. Granted, the tutorial is for you to actually go along with it, not just to watch because of a devlog. Anyway, let's get started, shall we? So, why am I doing this? Let's start from there. I know we kind of went off base just because of the new update, and me just like trying to understand what the heck just happened in the last month, update-wise. Anyway, why am I doing this? Obviously, from the first devlog, it's very obvious that I want feedback, regardless of how that feedback is. I have learned and grown from such feedback already, even if it doesn't seem like that is the case. When the first version released, my friend played it, and there were certain things that he said that I was like, you know what? That would probably be a good thing to change. Now, that is a short-term change that will completely not really matter in the grand scheme of things, just because there's certain features and certain things I will be doing for the game that will completely and utterly change how the game is played. I'm looking at the combat as an example. And that feedback originally was you were able to spam attacks. Now, changing it so that the player doesn't or isn't able to spam attacks is something that I did eventually do, but doesn't really, again, matter at the end of the day when I'm going to be adding a combo system to the game. Which that I'm still, I had ideas on how to handle it, and that kind of went out the fucking window because I didn't touch this for like over a plus month. So I'm gonna have to like rethink it through. I had an idea. We will see. It's gonna be, the idea, I'll get to it, and it'll probably be its own video, but as what I'm thinking as a hint, it's gonna be tied to those platformer games and how you would double jump. Except for attacks. Kind of get the general gist. So that's the idea I have in my head. Again, that is not final. It's just something that I might as well throw out there. But anyway. So as we continue through this project, going back to what was the original point, hopefully with the feedback and what people say can alter and change the game into something better, even if it means it takes a longer time for it to come out. I'll kind of talk about the scope of things later on in this video, but that will tie into how long I plan on going for this game. There's certain things I will be going over that will kind of get an idea of what I'm thinking or trying to implement, and as things go on, things change. And I have not touched the game project since because I want to at least, like, a flat line of, like, okay, this is everything that I want to an extent talk about before each and every single video I make is going to be pretty much around what I did given the time in between devlogs. And I want to give a lot more focus of said devlogs on those specific things. Devlogs, my original plan was every 2 months, or I think I said every other month, but pretty much every other month to 2 months, I will probably end up at the very end of the month doing a devlog. Though that didn't really go too well for like the very first one, second one technically, but I'm gonna say the first one of actually properly around what I've done. Anyway, that's going to the other thing. I'm not going to be able to talk about everything in this project. Just on a spoiler aspect, but more of there's so much to talk about that it will honestly drag how long this video will end up being. So I want to try not to make this too long, especially because hopefully in future devlogs it'll be a lot shorter as I focus on specific things that I think are noteworthy. Like, looking ahead in the future, probably one of them's going to be around the combat system and the changes and the tweaks to actually have like a combo system. But again, that's future talk. Continuing on here. So, the idea of this game, I'm going to reiterate what I said to an extent from the first devlog. It's going to be a short game that will have some replayability, that is not going to be centered around it being a roguelike, but there will be a bit of randomness to it so that after a certain point in the game, it will always be different things you have to handle. Hopefully the code running works. And even if you do somehow, to an extent, get a very similar experience to a room, there will be different amounts of enemies and different types of enemies per room after, certain points in the game. I would say the beginning to possibly going into the middle section is going to mostly be the same, but going from the middle section to the end of the game, however the end of the game looks like, will be way more randomized for the player experience. Anyway, as I mentioned in the script here, talking about scope briefly, honestly, I think I just a sick. Okay, so I probably will go into scope more when we get around to Trello, because Trello is what I'm using to kind of keep track of things like that. We'll have a better idea of what I might be going for, but the general idea, a little bit of the scope, is not to do too much. I do want to eventually release this. At this point, with how things are going, hopefully release this before the end of next year. That is my goal. When that will exactly be, I don't know. And as I already mentioned before, when it comes to will this game be free or to be paid, I've honestly gone back and forth since the last few times I've talked about it. My original thought process was free, but at times with certain people, there's a part of me that's like, I would, if I did put like, okay, you had to buy this game, it would probably be not above $10. The bare maximum would probably be 10. The bare minimum, if I put a price on it, would be about $2. Or I'll end up making it free. Again, I'm going back and forth, especially with what other people say. And it's not something that it's like, I thought originally had like a good idea, but with more input from other people and what other people say, and not just from this game project, but other people may like that, it's gone all sorts of ways. I'm not really specifically finalized what I will do for the price point, because again, this game's not even like there yet. So personally, I'm just gonna leave that up into the air still. The main plan being free, but that's, who knows what ends up being the end project of how things will go in terms of pricing, especially with how the gameplay is and if people will like it or not. A lot of things to take into consideration. Honestly, that it's like way too much to take into consideration, and I don't think you're gonna be perfect. Anyway, last but not least for the intro for this video, the experience with GameMaker. Now, I've had enough experience with GameMaker at this point, especially between July, around the starting point, to October, that certain games that I played around the fall to now, I noticed that certain games that I played was like, oh, this was made in GameMaker. I can tell. There's one game in particular that I don't like. I want to say it is just based off the pure fact of what I've seen. The game ended up using an asset that is also in GameMaker. That it may not be directly from GameMaker, but it probably is an asset from GameMaker to an extent, which is the poison animation, or the quote-unquote poison animation, under the particle systems. Now, I will talk about particle system to an extent at a later point, especially when it comes to a certain thing called AI. Lots to talk about AI, because that's going to be the next section here. I guess I'm ripping the band-aid off real quickly with that. The particle system is... it's very easy to tell, because it's like very similar to the game I played. I enjoyed that game. It's the only thing that I recognize, like, okay, this is probably from GameMaker. That's like the only thing I could really tell. But it's like, if you don't really change enough, you can kinda tell if something's a bit off, especially with the whole particle system. Particle system I don't think is a bad idea, but if you don't change anything from the particle system, it is very obvious that it's from the particle system from GameMaker, or at least from whatever engine they made on. I could be completely wrong on it being from GameMaker, but it was just something that I was like, huh, interesting. And that game in particular is... we're on Steam here just a little bit, but I did 100% the game. But yeah, it's Trine's Legacy. I enjoyed this game. I'm not really an SNES kid. I'm more of a GBA kid, to get an idea of when I was born and what I was playing, and what I was mostly focusing on after a certain point. But I enjoyed it. There's a bit of it that kind of reminds me of GBA to an extent, but I enjoyed it. It is what it is. Let's continue on. Okay. So, that's out of the way. Let's get into the main next section here. And that is, of course, AI. I know I kind of already ripped the band-aid off a little bit, but I think it's necessary to talk about. So, AI. AI, to me, from what people talk about, I think most people have the same reaction to AI as Republicans to naysayers of COVID-19, to an extent. Like, you had some Republicans / some people that just didn't believe the fact of COVID-19 existing or being much of an issue. It was still an issue, but it wasn't that much of an issue, but it was still an issue. And then you have the situation with AI. I think AI, to an extent, a lot of people are going to overuse it. But I don't think the AI should be considered a plague. But I do believe there needs to be... There's a lot of nuance to it. There needs to be changes to it. There needs to be better ways of handling the existence of AI. Especially with the whole situation evolving around prices for, utilities with water and stuff going up, because you have companies pretty much creating AI centers to house these AI models. And it's like I think AI, unfortunately, is here to stay. It will probably not be in a better... I don't think it will be in a state that it will be like what people are thinking it to be. That might be maybe a long time from now. But as of right now, I think it will regardless be here to stay, even if it's not as functional as most people want it to be. And I do think there needs to be changes with how AI is done or implemented. But capitalism says no to that, so things get a bit tricky with that to take into consideration. To the point... Excuse me. To the point where certain indie groups and companies are making pledges of no use of AI. It's that insane. Like, I don't know where this is specifically at. It's kind of similar to the whole, like, Nintendo pledge of, like, old Nintendo games, or, like, this is officially endorsed by Nintendo type of thing, that this is a quality product. That's kind of starting to happen for indie games, and I'm not entirely certain where this is starting or what's going on. This is something I randomly came across, actually, funny enough, today. But I don't really believe, to an extent, that that's a good thing either. I know, you can raise your pitchforks all you want. I'm that random guy that's like, okay, there's a lot of nuance to this, and I think AI can have some use. You cannot use AI 24/7, you should not use AI 24/7, but AI still has use. And there are a lot of people, especially in the indie game community, think of it as the plague. And I think that is the wrong mindset to have. Raise your pitchforks all you want, but this is what I believe. Okay. AI is 100% an important topic to take into consideration. So that's why I am making it into this own section for those that are unaware. Even if it somehow tanks my, how I am viewed, I think that's an important thing to talk about. The first thing that I probably should mention, and that's very important with AI, is vibe coding. Vibe coding is where someone, in the terms of coding for a project, game, service, whatever it may be, overuses, essentially, AI and just copy-pastes whatever AI creates into whatever project they're working on. Now, from my own experience, this is not going to work. It's either going to be hilariously incompetent, or just not going to straight up work. And this is, of course, based on my past experiences already, because there will be a section talking about that, of a certain project of me just trying to do something different, and then realizing that overusing AI will not lead to anything good. Again, I will explain further detail in that section. But I'm just telling you, the main issue of why it doesn't work at this point in time is when the AI decides to think that this is the proper way to go about it. Or, what people say, hallucinations. Hallucinations that, okay, this is how this works. That is not how it works. And if you actually was in GML, GML will bitch slap you because, hey, this does not work. So, that's, I think, a good way to explain it, the hallucination thing. Of course, a good example that I don't really have anymore that I probably will show up on screen during one of the videos, either the original devlog or the first devlog, where the code will be on screen here, is the particle system that the AI thought was the proper way to go about doing the particle system. There are some issues with the whole fact, you know, it's not like they have after certain updates, they have a built-in particle system so you don't have to manually code it. So if you don't know how to manually code a particle system in, you could just head over to the particle system and create a new one. Oh, you just do right click and then I think it's like more probably not here. Create, right? Okay. Create particle system. It's that easy. It's that easy nowadays. You do not need to go in depth to go for a particle system. You could, in theory, you could, but it's not necessary anymore. On top of the fact that the AI, when I tried to do this originally, a decent time ago, when I was still kind of using AI too much, kind of bricked the game with what it thought was the best way to implement a particle system. To the point that I had to redo a section of code. This happened multiple times, and that is why if you were to check the gameplay of this version versus the original devlog, there's going to be some slight changes that even I recognized when I was doing the first devlog video. Some interesting knowledge for you. Just the fact of trying to insert random-ass code you don't understand the point of. This is why the biggest point I made of not fully using AI is what you should not be doing. Because there is a great chance your game will not run. It will not run. Good luck. It will not run. I can show you a game as an example of this. That's at least from my own experience. Now, when it comes to AI companies, it's probably, I don't know exactly how they would even go about using AI in their coding or development. But from my own experience, it's not something that you could just reliably use 24/7. But a lot of veteran developers, coders, do use AI still. And this is something that I feel like with the whole indie scene, where it's like, I understand there is this honor in not using AI, but you are purposely dropping off a tool that you can use in your toolbox just because it exists. Now, you don't have to. I'm not here to say you should or not, but you should use every tool in your toolbox. even if it's something like AI. And you should understand the point of AI before you just willy-nilly use it. That is like the biggest tip I can give for AI. Do not use AI until you understand the point or what you should be using it for. You should not be using AI to create code or vibe coding. You should use AI to give you ideas and put you on track of where you should be going for certain things. Better yet, AI should probably just put you into the direction of the documents for the engine. But that's, besides the point. And yes, even with me as an AI, I did eventually go to documents to look it up. I'm just gonna be brutally honest. Sometimes look it up online versus AI tends to be better in a lot of cases. Again, this is someone with past experiences using AI. This is why I don't fully use AI. Because I realize that AI is shit a lot of the time. Like, it could sure create interesting artwork, quote unquote. You know the whole deal with that. I don't think I need to go into depth with that. But it cannot code at fucking all. It does not have good enough logical reasoning or problem-solving skills. It just doesn't. Personally, from my past experiences, it is shit when it comes to coding. It's good at copying other people's stuff. It doesn't mean that it's gonna work with what you're trying to do. Anyway, so I will kind of go into the pixel art section because, believe it or not, I do not use it for pixel art. And if you're curious of what it would do for pixel art, it will just make a high quality definition artwork for you that does not fit into your game's the aspect ratio. So, for example, the specific aspect ratio for this game that I probably should look into more, regardless, is way too small to try to implement such a thing. Just because of, like, the depth of, like, where things are and how many pixels I'm actually using for the game, which does end up creating some issues for certain things that I might not go fully into here, but just kind of give you an idea that even with, if I wanted to lazy it out with artwork for whatever reason, it's not really great at that either. And it tends to, it essentially would have forced me to go on a higher aspect ratio than what I'm currently working at now. In the future, I probably could be focusing on that type of scenario, but that's not what really the case is going on here. And I won't be using artwork for AI, because I don't think it's going to be better than a human. Because I still think it's really easy to tell, to an extent, not just the whole 5-finger shenanigans that people still think. There's just a certain, like, thing to it that it's just, like, you can kind of tell, so not all the time. Like, AI is kind of getting to that point where it's hard to tell if it's AI, but there are ways to figure it out. And if you really want to, you could try to go through all the pixel artwork that I've done and see for yourself. Especially if you end up seeing it. Trust me, honestly, with all the artwork and stuff like that I've made, it looks kind of shit to an extent, but I did not use AI. If anything, the only use for me with AI when it comes to this project at this point that I've actually purposely used is what I've already mentioned before, of getting me straight, giving me, to an extent, like, okay, would this work? And the AI's like, no, you dumb shit. At least I know that's better. Type of like relationship we have. The pretty much veteran developers, in terms of how they view AI, is unpaid slave labor. Unpaid slave labor. That's the general gist of how veteran developers think of AI. Which is fair enough. If you know what you're doing, that's essentially what it is. Now, I think that's kind of it that I really wanted to mention when it comes to AI. I guess the other thing is that if I wasn't obvious enough, AI is there to help learn, and that's the main focus I was going for. Was to help learn and trying to figure shit out. And then again, of course, get bitch slapped by AI itself for getting some things wrong, or like, okay, you're getting the idea. Of course, AI is not the only source of info. There's certain things that I could mention off the beaten path by just looking it up, of course. But we need to talk about content creators, because if you think I mainly focus a lot of things that I've implemented in this game so far just from AI, you are wrong. There are some really great content creators out there that I won't be able to mention all of them, but I will mention some of them that I feel like are really interesting to see, or in some way, shape, or form did help me out with what I was trying to implement or create. Of course, the first one that, if you're coming from this from the tutorial side of things, Game Maker. The Game Maker's official YouTube channel. I'll probably have it on screen here. Along with other content creators, of course. But not just from the tutorial videos. The other one is Dragonite Spam. A content creator that is honestly pushing what is even thinkable or possible with Game Maker. He honestly has given me some ideas in the future, especially with using plugins like Chatterbox. He is creating a 2D, 3D-esque game that, while Game Maker doesn't quote-unquote support, it is possible. And he is in, I would say, the current process of making such a game. It's just unthinkable when you really think about it, but it is possible if you get in the nitty-gritty of actually writing the code yourself. And I think Dragonite Spam is like a cool content creator to look at if you want to see what's even possible. Like, honestly, there's a lot more opportunities with Game Maker than I think people take into consideration. Especially with other game engines. It's just that a lot of people don't tend to try to go into it to think that way. But it's possible. I mean, just look at Arknight's Enfield, people talking about how Hypergriff essentially just rewrote Unity to an extent, or part of Unity, to do what they do for that gacha game, Arknight's Enfield. It's a good example of, like, if you really take the time and get into the nitty-gritty, you could do some insane shit with any game engine. This is not a part of the script, by the way. I think this is just something interesting to take into consideration. No matter which game engine you're working with, you take the time and effort, and you can create some insane shit. Anyway, the other one is One Up Indie. This is the one that I feel like I've gotten a lot of things implemented thanks to him that may not exactly be in the same realm of what he intentionally did it for, but I took some of the coding ideas and implemented them for different things. It's kind of the idea of what I was talking about earlier with the double jumping, but using that as the combo system instead. As like taking an idea and twisting it into something else that works in what I was trying to do. Which I do like that idea a lot with the whole combo system, kind of similar to the jumping system with a certain time frame where you can attack again and yada yada yada. But there's some things that he's talks about or that he's shown with Game Maker that to an extent has helped me implement things that kinda do what he was doing. Or twisting it to do something different that has the same idea as a base of how it is implemented and it works in Game Maker. Now, there are other content creators out there that I've seen or looked into that I have implemented to an extent that I probably won't be able to go through everything, but it is a good showcase. They're pretty much other content creators that I think are worth mentioning. Anyway, I think it's time that we talk about the failed game project. shall we? I know I kind of already mentioned it as is, but we should probably go over it. Okay, we are now in the project that I pretty much consider the good example of what happens when you overutilize AI. Tic-tac-toe. So I had this idea of, after a certain point using Game Maker, I was like, okay, I wanted to an extent, try to see what I've learned from Game Maker. And well, to an extent, I learned more from Game Maker. To another extent, I realized how bad trying to use AI was. This project, at one point, and I really wish I saved at the time, or if I had the ability to, save that source version. The good showcase of, like, you should be saving your versions, guys. It was almost done. I almost got it done for what it was. I just needed to change it and make it work so that instead of it crashing and freaking out, it would go to an end screen and then go back. Awesome! I just almost finished the game! And then I overutilized the AI. And now, it's just an endless loop of the AI of the game. Not an actual AI, but the AI of the game. Just goes an endless loop, and you could just endlessly play your turn. I tried doing so much. I'm trying to remember why I even put a lot of the code. I remember double-clicking, being able to go to the source code. It's been on, I don't know if they changed some things. Okay. I don't know exactly what they changed, and I noticed that there was like there was a way that it was going for, but it seems like there's some setting changes that have happened, so now it's like in this format, so I was just kind of like, I was confused. I was like, I'm used to having it like the entire screen, like up here. So I'm still trying to figure things out with this new version, because I think that, I don't know if this was going back to the old version, or if they changed some settings so it's like this, looks like this now. Who knows? That's gonna be a little, it's gonna be a little annoying trying to figure all the code out, but it's not exactly it. But a lot of the code, if I remember correctly, is in the scripts, I believe. The AI take over script, so there's like so much to it. But essentially, let me run the game while I am at it here. And somebody doesn't freak out because this is a new version for Game Maker. Okay, so aside from, this is like the only, I would say, thing that I could say that gets out of tell. Like, not everything here, but like there's a huge portion of it that it's like, okay. You can see a lot of influence from AI. There's a lot of things that I could mention of, like, I would be implementing, like, the whole, like, being able to click instead of, like, keyboard to get into the game through the tutorial and stuff like that. But the general idea was I had it so that you could mark it, I marked, and then the AI takes its turn, and then it would actually mark something, or in the case for in the thing, the AI arm fired. Pretty much, it tells me that, hey, the AI played a move, but as you can tell, nothing plays. So that's essentially the issue that I came across, and I could never really figure it out, as I spiraled downward into an AI, trying to figure out what the fuck its own issue is, and never really being able to figure it out itself. So, it was a learning curve of, like, I was learning a lot of things from the attempts. But at the same time, I realized that the AI is really incompetent. Like, it has, like, fundamentals pretty good down, and I got to certain points. But somewhere along the line, we kind of got screwed over. And we just kind of went into a spiral. I think it's somewhere in the player's code. Or is it, I think it's the boss object. In the stem? Well, kind of in the step event, but not in the launch. I'm not entirely certain on where it was. But, oh, it was pretty much me continuously trying to go do great. Like, the AI was really hoping that the game would work properly, trying to use alarms. I don't know why. I cannot tell you for certain. It thought that maybe with the alarms that there would be a short time gap for the game to look through and figure out some things, or at least the AI, I should say. But that didn't really work out for the AI, and again, it was a learning experience of me realizing that the AI is complete garbage in a lot of aspects, and that it couldn't really figure out what the heck was going wrong with it, to the point where it had several mental breakdowns, I think is the best way to explain it. I think I'm over-exaggerating when I say that, but, yeah. So, anyway, I wanted to at least kind of showcase this a little bit. Would I go back to this project? Probably not. I could probably make another one, but I'm not really interested in making another tic-tac-toe, personally. But it was a learning experience to figure out, okay, what was going on, and at the same time, learning experience of trying something new, seeing if I learned some things, and to an extent, yes, to an extent, no, to an extent, I have a bad, unpaid slave intern. Anyway, let's go back to the main project here. Okay, one last thing before we go into the next section, which is not exactly the game, but is Trello. The main thing that I wanted to last talk about was the AI suggestion. One of the main things that the AI thought was necessary, that I will talk about later on in the video here, was using nymphs. And that the issue for what was going on was nymphs. Now, personally, I don't think fully that was the issue, but I can understand why it thought that. Just because the whole idea of using flags to take turns of who's going first or second. But something along the lines of whatever was added in all the additions of trying to fix it, fucked up the flag system that was working. By the way, it was originally working. Completely ruining that flag system. And the AI thinking, oh, it was the flag system that's the issue. We needed a NIMS. I didn't really believe that, just due in fact that I already got it to work before everything came crashing down with all the suggestions the AI thought was a good idea. Anyway, let's get over to the Trello real quick. Okay, Trello time. So, lots of things to mention here, and we'll kind of go over this, and there's several sections that are kind of in Trello in its own rights that I could mention or talk about. So the first things first, this is privated. I could make it public or viewable up on whatever. I know a decent amount of indie game companies have used Trello as like a roadmap to an extent. Well, that I could use that to an extent. This is mostly me just trying to like keep in mind of how things are going to go on in the future, and to keep me on track of what I'm currently working on and doing. Yes, is this spoiler territory? Sure, but the end result is probably going to be a lot more different than what Trello looks like right now, because you never know how much it's going to change. But this is like a good section to introduce the scope aspect more so, because this is kind of like the main focus for the next update of what I want to focus on. Things can change, but I think it's important to figure out where you want to stop, because I could keep adding things and just get scope creep and just continuously do things in a never-ending cycle, with the game either being released in a rough state or just never releasing at all. And that's why it's important to focus on your scope when you can. Step back a minute, look at the scope, figure out, do you want to actually lower what you're doing and focus on whatever? Try to lessen or remove scope creep. Try to get this out there. It's just things you have to take into consideration when making a game, and that is why I think in this example for Trello, it's very important that you get ahead of that, because I think it will help you out greatly. As it for me, who knows, but at least some ideas are on the board here, so that later on I'd be like, oh yeah, that's something I did think about. I can, given the amount, it's already been a month without even touching the game, I can still look at this and like, okay, that is something I do want to implement. That is a good way to remember. So again, even if it's like you end up getting busy and working on something, Trello can help out a lot with that. You can use the system for free. I'm using the free version right now, so take that in consideration. Anyway, while this is foreshadowing, I will be talking about the things that I did finish or done, which I think some of them can be a little bit of a fun stories here. So, the first things first, I'll kind of get into more of Game Maker here. Let me bring that up. So, this is just a tip that I wanted to bring in real quickly before we get into some Trello. Because I know this is one thing that stumped me. So we're kind of in the section of some things that have stumped me that I figured out or realized or knew. We're going to go into sprites here. And then we'll go into, I guess, the first sprite seat from the thing. And edit image. Okay. You can move like this, and you can't really move to left or right, per se. Let's say if you wanted to zoom in, but you realize that you can't easily move to the left or right, or want to move specifically somewhere, you just definitely miss this, but no. Middle mouse click on the wheel in this case, and you can drag, and you can get into wherever you want to. This is the first thing I had to actually look up myself. So let's say you're gone from the tutorial, and you just decided to watch this before actually starting on a game project, and you get into this situation or problem. Now you know you can use the middle mouse click. This is pretty much how you move in between everything in Game Maker when it comes to, like, instead of left clicking and moving, which some games or some apps do, like instead of a mouse click, maybe it's like moving your finger. It's the middle mouse button for Game Maker. And this is something you might see for different projects or maybe different engines. I'm not entirely certain, but I'm going to assume this is a thing for other engines as well, because it saves the left and the right mouse button for different things. For example, with the pixel editor here, you can have one color for the right mouse button and then a left counter for that. Literally, you can just look at this and you can understand what I'm saying. So, as an idea, it makes it easier to an extent. You could have one that you can erase pixels, while the other one could be whatever you're trying. Anyway. So at least there is that. Let me zoom out here. The other thing I want to briefly mention, let me go back into... Is that the best section? Trying to remember where this would be best seen. If I can go to tiles... Okay, yeah, this is where I wanted to be here. This is in the next section when it comes to Trello, or something that I found to be useful and good to know. And this comes along into one of the bug fixes that was, let's just say, stumped me. And that, of course, was the collision issue that I came across with a run. To the point where it was like, I have to redo the entire room? It was really, really stumped me and got me really confused. It was one of those weird quirks of Game Maker, or I guess a quirk for a game engine, that if you don't know or take that into consideration, you will never figure it out. No matter what you look into or what people suggest, And what was this collision issue? It was pretty much the fact of, well, you probably, if you haven't already figured that out yet, when it comes to the tile sets. And this might be a thing for other engines as well, but for GameMaker, you have all these tile sets, and the only unusable tile set is the top left tile sets. This is where the confusion comes in, because while this tile set you might think is similar to this tile set, where it pretty much deletes it. So if you want to delete a certain tile, for example, let me go with this tile here. Let me zoom in so you can see a bit better. You put this tile set here, and it's like, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. There's two ways to go about this. One is what ended up happening for this room, was instead of this, I went with the invisible, which makes it invisible. The big issue is that that block, that tile, is still there, but it's invisible. So, what you have to do is use this. This will delete it. So it's like, it's kind of the same deal, but essentially this is used to remove that tile set from this board. This is also why, when making tile sets, the top leftmost section you should never touch. Generally, the engine, at least for GameMaker, will show this as a polka dotted black and white. You do not put anything here, because whatever you put there will not be displayed and will not show up. So make sure you go around this top left center with whatever tiles you're going to go with, and that this is essentially to delete or remove that tile set from that section. And just don't assume that this outside of the top left does the same thing. No, it just makes it invisible. Which does have some interesting use case scenario in sections, like invisible barriers, essentially. But aside from that, it's something to take into consideration that really stumped me at one point, that made me like freak out a little bit. And that's why it's one of the major dumb things that, while for me it's a big milestone of learning more about GameMaker, I think it's a really good thing to talk about for newer users of GameMaker or newer developers, that hopefully, if this were to encounter, make sure that that tile is not invisible and that you actually deleted said tile. And hopefully, you might have spawned it in with code to be an invisible tile, so there's that to take into consideration as well. I don't know, most new developers probably, if they're new to developing in general and using GameMaker, they probably won't be spawning in said tiles with code. They're probably going to be dragging and dropping them in. Generally, it's actually a lot easier that way, personally. I think that's what most people tend to do anyway. But if you're really tech savvy, you could probably just code it by hand. But I mean, I think even with those guys, unless they want to flex their coding knowledge, will probably just drag and drop. Anyway, so aside from that, we're going to go into the game real quickly, and we're going to be talking about interactions with NPCs, and of course, or additions / changes to certain things that I've learned and done with a specific NPC. First of all, though, let me see. Is room tile start? What is the start? I don't. Let me check here. I'm going to assume it is. I probably changed it while I did it the last time, so yes, I'm going to assume it is. If not, I can change that real quickly. Is missing prefabs. Why are you missing prefabs? Oh! Okay, because of the... okay, that is... that's it, okay. That is an issue. So, I originally was using, they probably changed it, yeah. So let me... Huh? Why are you... Let me... That is weird. Okay, I'm gonna have to look into that a little bit because they've changed some things. Like I said, they changed a lot of things because I was using the effect type. I wonder if they changed that system. I'm gonna have to look into it. I have a feeling they probably paywalled that. So I'm gonna have to go through all of these rooms here. It's probably gonna give me the same issue. I'm gonna quickly edit and change this and figure this out. Be back in a sec. Okay, so I just had to quickly look into it real quickly. I was able to fix it to remove it, but essentially, I guess with the latest update, they accidentally removed all of the connection paths to essentially the missing prefabs for the effects and filters. So that's why that was kind of like something I didn't want to really kind of go into, and I think that would have been interesting for you guys to figure out and see for yourself. I'm gonna have to re-implement all of those things in the future. That is a mistake on GameMaker's part, and it seems like there's an easy fix to it that I'm gonna look into or trying after this video's case. But it should be something fixed hopefully in the future. So there was some interesting things that were implemented or done and that you would have been able to see in the original attempt of Devlog 2, but that is not the case in this version. Anyway, crazy shit happening with the newer version that I'm just kind of not trying to put into the devlog, but it is what it is type of situation. So I can't click it with my mouse as an example. Some things I want to implement from the tic-tac-toe that I can't implement into GameMaker here. But essentially, let's kind of go over the two facts. There's a lot of other things that you'll probably notice that I will also talk about here while I'm at it. So for example, the interaction with NPC. So you no longer interact with the NPC by left-clicking. This is something that the tutorial had, where you could essentially interact and press the left mouse button to continue on with the message. I thought that kind of looks tacky to an extent, where you saw the attack while talking. I mean, it's not like too insane, but to me, I thought it would have been a better case to have it so that left click is still attack, but the spacebar is to interact with things, especially with NPCs, to continue the dialogue. Okay, so the other thing that we're kind of mentioning here, this is kind of on its own thing that I will mention shortly, which is, if you notice, is of course the NPCs, the other NPCs, the enemies. They look a little nicer compared to the first devlog. While that guy is actually holding on to me, I probably should lower his distance. Or not, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day because he's easy to lose. They're not looking bad. They actually look like they're colliding with the walls properly. Which was a simple fix. I'll get into that here shortly. And I'll kind of explain. Right now I am in the debug phase of debugging certain things last time I played this, so I'm kind of proud as AF. Anyway, the other thing is changes in NPCs. So, essentially, after I talk to Aurelio here, she changes dialogue. It isn't just changing dialogue, there's this new quote-unquote animation where she runs off, and then, you can talk to her again, and her dialogue is different. Nothing crazy, realistically, but this is more than from the tutorial. This is something that I had to go into to an extent by myself. Yes, I did use AI to an extent, but a lot of it was me getting to this point where I can change it, and I figure it out just by putting two to two together and asking the AI and implementing it without trying to do whatever the AI says. Anyway, so after you go, whatever Aurelio says here. Now, I could implement more checks to see if there's any ant monsters or anything, but honestly, I'm not going to worry about that until way later on for probably a future version if it really bothers people. So yeah, Aurelio runs the fuck away quickly. as you would in a cave with monsters, and then is now at the entrance of the place, and of course, yay, thankfully, thank you for helping me out, and new dialogue. Nothing too insane, realistically, but it's big progress, regardless. Like, for a new developer, this is honestly big. Around the time that I did this. So, yeah. Just some small things here and there. Now, let's talk about the enemies real quickly, because I kind of specifically mentioned it. So, what was the original issue from the first version, and why it looked a little off, and why, probably when you followed the tutorial, it looks a bit off for the enemies? Well, if you went into it, thought about it, and took the time to do something about it, you would start to realize that it's a really simple issue. Essentially, compared the same thing for the player, it's a collision thing. You need to change the collision to trick the eye to an extent to think that the enemy is getting closer to the wall, while not exactly being completely through the wall and making it look unrealistic. And just changing the collision mask the same thing as the player, so that it looks good, hence why the AI, the NPCs I should say, of the AI, while it hits the wall like that, it doesn't go into the wall. And of course, I will show you guys the original collision mask of the small changes and tweaks I did for the enemy. Now, there is something I will talk about later when it comes to this, but I wanted to kind of mention some more debugging stuff. I will say that for later, but as a showcase, I can spawn in enemies whenever I want to. Again, there's a lot of things I want to mention here, but again, we'll save that for later. Next, as I said already, we're going to check out the collision for Enemy 1. This will bring up a little bit of spoilers, but there's so many things I want to do for enemies/enemy sprites that honestly, this is really nothing of what I've planned for. So if you see something interesting, just note there's more plans for more in the future. So, something that I think is a kind of a downfall of a tutorial, especially with GameMaker. Well, yes, they're making their own thing to make it work, and there's a lot of testing that they go into to make things actually work. For the tutorial, there are some things that they probably will miss out on, either because they're forgetting, they didn't experience it, didn't think about it, maybe lacking to a certain extent on something, whatever may be the case. Essentially, this is something that might fall through the cracks, and this is one of those things that it makes sense when you think about it, but it's pretty much simply, for the enemies, make sure they have a collision mask as well. That's as simple as it is. Just go to a certain point where it makes sense for it to be, and above, to an extent, the wall. Maybe some layering changes. I probably could maybe lower it a little bit more, but that's where I gotta get the effect where it doesn't look bad and it looks natural of enemies being near the wall. All of them have a collision mask. I won't go through everything because spoilers, but you kinda get the general gist. Okay. There's something I mentioned that I thought of, but I'm not going to worry about saying it in the script. I did redo some character looks like the main player. I think I already mentioned it before, but I will be using the Chatterbox plugin for dialogue boxes and narrative purposes for future GameMaker projects that I may end up creating. That's still on the table because I may actually just straight up move to Godot. And that's my thought process. Because while there's some game projects that I could make or work on that I learned in GameMaker, there are certain projects that I want to make, that I've thought about and want to do, but they're going to be 3D. So, because of that, it kind of like, well, shit. Probably going to move to Godot, and I'm probably going to have to do what I've done here but to an extent in Godot. Not really, but you kind of get the general gist. Okay. Next important section, scripts. The importance of scripts. Scripts are really important. Really good tool, especially when you're trying to use something in multiple times at different places in said code. After a certain point, I started using scripts more, and I really should be using more of them. I will start using them more when I get back into working on the game. For example, while you have it for death, for NPCs and like that, I also will be making one for the player. So, and there'll be certain sections probably later in the video where instead of the code for whatever the player dies, I instead use a script to do whatever I want to do when a player dies. That's right, just that. Scripts, and I believe death. So, yeah, so this is just an example of, I just put in script, or scr dash underscore 0 underscore HP. You know, pretty much this entire line here. And then do semicolon, you know, the general just end the section of code. And end up doing all of the code in here. Pretty much, the general gist for scripts is you're going to be, if let's say it's used in multiple, let's say it's a set of code that is very similar to other sets of code, like extremely similar or pretty much the same, ends up being used in multiple places of the game's code, you should be using scripts. So in this case, while there'll be a lot more added into the future, especially specifically for the death when it comes to scripts. There's a lot of things I'm thinking of on top of my head that I could essentially just put in, okay, if player dies, do this. And there you go, scripts so that I could plug into wherever the player dies, so I don't have to manually type in the same code all the time. Just a faster and easier way to just save a lot of time on trying to redo scripts. Of course, there are some scripts that are through the tutorial. For example, in the create dialogue script, I will be mentioning this create dialogue script again for the structs and enums, which honestly I could probably just do that now because that's just essentially the end of the script. So, segue into that. So yeah, while the script does feature everything when it comes to the create dialogue, which is in the player's code, this also uses structs. Now, I'll kind of briefly talk about structs and enums here. I don't really have enums in place currently at this point in time, and that's mostly just due in part that I haven't really had a situation where I could use one properly for the project. But I have been using structs. Now, there's like combining multiple things like struct enums and stuff like that. Things can get a lot more complicated really quickly that I've seen people talk about that I have not really delved myself into just yet. But I have, obviously with the tutorial does get into structs when it comes to the dialogue of the NPCs, and of course with the coloring for text for at least the names. Now, you could probably do the same thing for instead of the names, but like the message. I would have to look into it a bit more and find where that code is again. But I don't think it'd be too difficult to implement. But you can essentially do the same thing and adjust / alter the message of what it looks like. So, kind of the same idea, you just have to go into it. I did also work on like adding different colors of my own. instead of like the normal gray, normal purple, more fuchsia, normal yellow, white, green, yada yada yada. White is pretty much not right, but more of what the original color was of whatever the font is, whatever. Most of the time, that's generally what it's used for, but in this case, it actually is white instead of like maybe like the image. My brain's being stupid with the correct image function. You can set it to white. That tutorial also goes over, so it's nothing too different. Anyway, so while create dialog also uses structs, there's other parts in the code that also uses structs, which is of course, while this may look different, we're going to be talking about the object player. So I believe it's in the step event, or there's part of it that's step event, and I think there's part of it that's in the create event. So we'll just open up both of these here. So I created a struct for Static Edition. Essentially, in this case, I'm using the struct as a flag to flag, like, okay, is it poisoned or is it not? Or in this case, whatever status condition that I'm using for. I just brought down like several ideas I've had. Most of it is essentially poison, at least I'm using for now. I have other stuff for like burn and stuff like that. But essentially, I have it right now flagged, so it's false, and then whenever you quote-unquote get poisoned, it turns true, and then it sets whatever condition of it being true to happen, which I believe is going to be in the step event. Let me see if I can get around to it. Yeah, right here. So if the player ends up being true, so this will be then flagged. And of course the alarm is for later on in the code for when the poison eventually stops. Because there's several ways I could have went about poison here, but pretty much the general gist is when it will disappear or not disappear, and what you can influence to have it disappear. In the case in this instance, I made it so that the poison will eventually dissipate from the player character, but that's why we have the alarm, which is for the timer. So while this could be changed and edited every so often, or I mean, it's every so often, whenever I need to change it, I essentially have it so that if the player can get the quote-unquote antidote for however I implement it, I wish there is a way you can use an antidote. It's just, this could be done more with. Regardless, you can use that to instantly get rid of the poison, or wait for essentially, I would say, I think it's like 10 minutes? I think it might be like 3 minutes or less. I'm trying to do math in my head. Cause I think it's like, based off this is like milliseconds. Each essential like tick or time of like, so like one for alarm is like 1 millisecond. I'm trying to do math quickly here, and I think it's 3 minutes, because there's 100 milliseconds in a second, and there's 60 seconds in 1 minute. If I'm correct. I could be incorrect. I might have been doing the math wrong. Anyway, you get the general gist. After a certain amount of time, you will no longer be poisoned. And the poison timer will reset, so that the poison timer will continue to count down if you get poisoned again, etc., etc. And of course, if you die from this interaction, you die, you go back to room 1. And this is a good example of what I mean, that in this, I could instead do this, I could just remove this and put in a script of whatever happens when the player dies. So again, another a showcase of what we can use for script. I also have burn, but I haven't really touched it in a hot minute, and I'm trying to figure out how to implement a system that affects the movement speed when it burns. But that is, we'll see what ends up happening. I may change what I do. We'll see. Again, this is like, will change type of stuff. But this is the showcase of structs that I have currently in the game. To me, I'm not really probably even remotely using structs efficiently, because structs, and I do believe to an extent, is a really powerful tool to use. Anyway, continuing on, let's talk about enemy spawn code. Now, I'm going to be putting these two sections together, just because they're very similar in approach, and in terms of the idea of how, like, with one system working, I had to essentially do something else to implement it so it's not horrendous, essentially. So, originally, in the player's code, which I think is still, I think it's in the create? No, it's in... I don't believe it's here. No. It's room end? No, it's room start. Room start. So, while the room ends has the whole carrying data thing, we're not going to worry about that too much. I briefly explained it, but it's in the tutorial, so I'm not going to worry about it here. But the general gist is that this I did change the approach here. I could move this code, but I'm being lazy and keeping it here. But in this instance, I pretty much check to see if the player is in the third room, and then I have a system that spawns in the enemies. This, in idea, is not bad, and it does keep some code specifically with the object player. But I think over time, this could end up being bad. Like, the idea of having all the code in one section is not a bad idea, but I think if you continuously have the game or the engine or whatever focus on all the code in one section, I feel like if there's too much to look through, the longer you would have to wait, and I could see some frame droppage because of it long term if I continue to use, let's say, room start to figure stuff out. Now, granted, it's not like the worst thing in the world, but to me, I decided to, just to be on the safe side, that makes a lot more sense, I decided to put the new spawning code of enemies, not just dragging and dropping, but specifically spawning them in the room creation code. Hence why I still have the room random 3 here. I've already showcased this in a teaser before when it comes to what people call the salsa background. But anyway, so in the creation code here, which is pretty much whenever you have selected room random 3, there would be like a creation code, instance creation code, yada yada yada. So in the creation code, there's a lot to mention here, but I don't want to spend too much here. There's a lot. Essentially, I made it so that I created an array in a for loop. So the game will continuously go through an array of whatever the pool is. So the pool of the array, in this case, would be enemy 2 and not the enemy 2-1, which is like an alternate version of enemy 2. And of course, we have a choose function to choose between one of the two arrays of the choices of the enemy 2 or enemy 2-1. And then whenever it goes to the creation code, random ranges of whatever the enemy's placed at on the instance layer, it will take one of the two enemy types and place it, and it will keep going through this loop of about pretty much 45 times. Going from 0 to 44, hence why 45 is still technically number-wise 45, but it goes from 0 to 44. Anyway. And it pretty much does the same thing for a different set of enemy pool choice, which is a lot less, but these are different enemies. I won't go into those enemies specifically. Again, I'm trying not to spoil everything, but I think this could be interesting, like, variety-wise to bring in certain enemies. There is some issues and some things to talk about. So, first of all, let's talk about enemy spawns real quick. So while I talked about being able to choose when to spawn enemies as a debug, you might be wondering, well, what if they spawn outside in undesirable locations? And that's a good question. That is a genuine good question. So I implemented code that will influence how enemies interact where they're not supposed to be. Hence, scripts. You remember how I said I used scripts? I actually genuinely meant it. I believe it's in debug? No, not debug. I mean, there's a debug of me trying to see if I died. Not that. Not zones. Actually, yes, zones. Okay. I'll kind of briefly talk about zones here because I did make a script for zones. Zones in particular will be important to note here a little bit, but more so for music and sound effects, which is kind of like the last section. But anyway, going over to the scripts. So the idea was, okay, I need to figure out, okay, if the enemy is in an undesirable location, what happens? Essentially, not to bore you with all the checks here, essentially, there will be another one for the player as well, depending upon if the player is somewhere it's not supposed to be. Certain interesting things does happen. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to here. You get the general gist. So, if an enemy were to spawn in the tile, essentially you won't really necessarily be able to see it because it's so fast. But let's just showcase what happens. Yeah. So, essentially, the NPC will instantly dart through the wall at a certain angle, where either it will go back into a tile where it can just roam around needlessly all over the place, or in the case if it decides to spawn in the lava, or essentially hits lava, or I say the background, or essentially the background wall here. I essentially made it so that the enemy pretty much gets annihilated. So nothing happens, or you can briefly see that the NPC just completely despawns. Um, or in that case, he just kind of. Okay, you guys got fucking lucky. Okay, there's some tweaks that I probably could make, but generally speaking, there's not these weird instances where there's like a few tiles where it's just the background for the most part, so that's really unlikely to happen. But generally speaking, the NPC will generally die. I think I think in this scenario, the NPC is so fast that the game can't catch that the NPC is on the background wall. I think that's what's actually generally happening. But I don't think this is like a great showcase level because there's no random spawns. But let's say here, the enemy does just despawn. And if the NPC is unlucky enough, it will just despawn if it hits the wall and hits the lava. So essentially checks to say, okay, there's no way in any shape or form there should be, unless it's quote-unquote flying, I don't know if I will end up making flying foes or not, that essentially they will pretty much not live in places they're not supposed to live. So they should always will be essentially on the tiles where the player can be to always be a threat. They're not going to be in the lava taking a sun bath or lava bath or surfboarding on lava for whatever reason. They will completely and utterly burn to death. Along with the fact that if they're stuck in the walls, there's code to force them out of being stuck. So just great debugging attempts that I went through. Again, this is actually without AI. This is me just taking the time to make debugging scripts so that enemies don't get stuck and are not just running around crazily in lava. So yeah. And there is the enemy spawn code. So if with the whole randomization of enemies spawning, yes, in theory, it looks insane, randomly spawning 45 enemies, but a decent portion of those enemies don't live, because they either get spawned in lava, or they, they just go into lava, because they get stuck and they spawn into a block. So that these sections of code, in a way, is a check to make sure that I can go ham wild with randomization spawns, but at the same time, it's not like, immersion breaking, essentially. But yeah, so I can do some interesting stuff in the future, especially with the idea of adding like debug scripts to make sure certain things happen and certain things don't happen. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about before we kind of end with this section here is randomizing. This honestly tricked me at first because I didn't really think it was an issue, because it never really was an issue until now. So there is this thing called seeds. So I think for most gamers, you probably understand what I'm getting at here. So there are seeds that determine how the game reacts when it comes to randomization. Now, generally speaking, for the most part, I mean, most people can find out seeds eventually, or not, but there's some people that specialize in trying to figure that out, because then you can RNG manipulate and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, so what's the point? Essentially, there is a lot of randomness to this code of enemy spawns, and on top of you as the player. The issue that I ended up coming across was I kept getting the same RNG 100% of the time. I had to eventually look this up. I actually didn't really look it up through the AI. I wanted to look this up without using the AI, and I figured out what was essentially the cause. It was randomization. For some reason, well, for the most part, the seeds do get randomized, so it's not always the same case. When it comes to, say, the creation code for a room, it will always be the same seed based off of going into that room, whatever the seed is for the game that it's on. So to mitigate this, you essentially use the randomize function. So for me, I just did randomize as is and fixed it. So now it's just completely and utterly random. There is some tweaks you could do when it comes to this. They also mentioned you could see what the randomized seed is for debugging purposes and like that. But in this case, I don't have to necessarily worry too much because it really gets the job done of what I wanted to go for. So this is like one of the few issues that I came across, and sometimes just looking up solved the issue. In this case, like, yeah, it worked out for me. So yeah, I won't explain everything when it comes to this code, but the general gist is, while you do have the enemy spawns, these enemy spawns are actually based off of where you spawn. So, depending upon the number from 2 to 5, this was me trying to debug, randomize. I could change this, but I'm going to keep it as is. So essentially, depending upon if it's 2, 3, 4, or 5, depends upon the location the player spawns in, which is also going to be important for this room. I won't explain why. And it will also spawn in specific enemies. Well, it will pretty much be similar enemies no matter where in this room you spawn in, but it will essentially be around where you spawn in, so you have to deal with it. Now, I don't know what I'm gonna do more for this level, because I had ideas of adding more to it, but due to trying not to spend too much time on this level, I may change the idea / thought process. We'll see, type of thing. That's I'm still debating upon if I want to do more for this room, but you kind of get the general gist. Anyway, last but not least, we have music and sound effects. I kind of briefly talked about in the last one about sound effects and music, but for the most part, I didn't really showcase much at all. I'm to where I need to get to, and since I was going to try to look into creating music, it didn't really work out well. So, as I mentioned in the first version of Devlog 2, I am probably going to, in the future, seeing about commissioning someone to make music for me. And that is the idea going forward. I did test out music when I was, just to test out. I used Winnie the Pooh and Xehanort from Kingdom Hearts. Of course, this won't be in the final game, but I pretty much tested with those two tracks, and that actually kind of works well with what I was going for. But that is, besides the point. And this kind of goes back into what I mentioned previously, zones. So this didn't really come from out of nowhere. I pretty much looked into one idea I had was using zones to figure out where the player was and do something. Now this wasn't for music at the time, but this was for something else that, I kind of will explain, it's not too much of a spoiler, but it will, essentially there will be zones, quote unquote, that depending upon if the player is over said zone, something will happen. Maybe you go to the next room, yada yada yada. Kind of the idea of like what you may think of with like the GBA Pokemon games. Like let's say Emerald, for example. Whenever you get up to a door, there's like this green arrow that pops up that blinks. That's kind of the idea I went with, where it's like you get to that, you go past it, and then something happens. For example, in Pokemon, you just go in, there's the door animation, you go in, and then you're in the house. You pretty much change to a different location. So yeah, that's kind of the general original idea with zones that I wanted to do, but I decided to use said zones into music, and then if they're not in said zone, something else could happen. So that's a general idea. Now, I don't have to always use zones, by the way, but it's a good way to like focus on specific music depending upon where you are. And I can expand this further in the future, especially if I go back to Game Maker for future projects. Okay. Last but not least, we have sound effects. Now, I'm going to have to find sound effects here. Just a sec. Okay. Here we are. So, with the switch case here, in the... Let me get to it real quickly. I believe it's in sounds. There's music, and then I have sound effects. So, sound effects, I created these 3 sound effects from a website known as BFXR, which should be on screen here. So BFXR is able to create the 3 sound things that you probably did hear when I was showcasing the gameplay whenever the enemy got hurt. So pretty much in the code of when the objects of the quote-unquote attack hits the enemy, or pretty much collision with the enemy, there's the whole take damage, knockback, yada yada yada, but it'll also play a sound effect. So I use a switch case of a randomization of 3 different different sounds. Essentially, this is kind of to an extent using a set of each array. It is an array to an extent, but for each different sound. So, for example, case 1, which would be 0 if it chose 0 of the 3 random here, it will do the normal hits, and then yada yada. So essentially, with when the enemy hits, the game chooses one of the 3 sound effects from the switch case, and it will play that with the audio play sound based off the settings I gave it. And then each time the enemy gets hit, the enemy should have a different sound effect. So, what's with the 3? Is it like 3 different sounds? Well, it is 3 different sounds, but it's not to the extent you may think. There is this thing in sound effects that people have already kind of figured out. So essentially the idea is that there's a main sound effect, and then there are different pitches for sound effects. So you have a higher pitch and a lower pitch. This will give a lot more annoying sound effects a bit of variety that creates a scenario where it's harder for the player to get, what's the best way of saying this, annoyed, bored with the same sound effect playing over and over. It does depend upon the sound effects, of course, but in this case, there's certain cases where maybe having different pitches of but very similar sound effects is better than just one specific sound effect. So that's what I went with for this attack sound effect when an enemy gets hit. And I believe that is everything when it comes to music and sound so far. So, just to recap, music, I will be getting someone to work with to work on said music. Well, when it comes to the sound effects, while I am using PFXR, I may end up working other sound effects in the future, or maybe have someone else make sound effects. I don't know. But at this point, yeah, that's, I think, the general gist. I probably will add in more sound effects in the future. I'm not there yet. But this kind of gives an idea of me, like, testing things out and implementing some things. So, like, in the future, I can go from there and add to it. Okay. We are finally at the last section of the devlog here. Something that I talked about earlier in the video, which of course is Pixar. I'm new to it. But while I may be new to it, I want to say it's not too difficult to learn. Especially with the fact that after you kind of understand like some of the basics to an extent, again, I'm not a master, I would say I'm still a newbie, I learned a lot of things, and I took the idea of inspiration and going from there. Because the thing about Pixar is that it's very easy to add more details. There we go. So, I will go over some sprites here. But for example, you have, let me go to shop here, this anvil. That I took some inspiration from what other people made for anvil, but I tweaked it and changed it so that it looks like an anvil. Honestly, I probably could do a lot better job, but I think it does what it needs to do. There's a lot more, especially some things I did redo later on. That's not what I wanted to do. But another one that I wanted to show off that I actually really liked that I did was the fountain. So the fountain is pretty much simple. I just looked at what other sprite works they did for fountains. I did not go the fancy route of making a 3D fountain with like some stone statue in the middle or whatnot. What you tend to see for like more fancier fountains. I just went with like a plain, almost pond look to it, but still, quote unquote, a fountain. Made a bit of like a 3D look to it, and then I decided to add an animation so that the light reflections move back and forth. So nothing too crazy, but it gives us illusion of moving water in a set of a pond. Could I add more detail to it? True, I could. But to me, I like it. I like it. And this is the sort of thing that is a good showcase of when proving the points of the whole AI section was I did use AI, but not to the extent of what you may think when people use AI. I used AI to help me learn, not really to create things, or to do all the code. And this is a good example of me taking a reference from something, editing it, trying my best to make it look decent. It's not perfect to a certain extent, which I think kind of adds a bit of almost flavor to it to an extent, like a bit of uniqueness. But anyway, and I just end up adding a bit of but thanks to like the small animation loop of Gamora going back and forth, and to me, I like it. I generally like this so much. And that's the thing, it's like, I didn't really think there's certain things I would do that I would like it so much, but here I am, creating an animation for like a fountain for a game that I'm making. And it looks actually good. I mean, it could look better, but I think it looks good. Anyway, enough of me spoiling certain sprites, but you kind of get the general gist. I was originally going to be changing one of the tree sprites. I say I was going to, I probably will, but I'll probably speed this section up. But you kind of get the general gist. Anyway, I'll probably keep talking in the background just to not, go crazy. So I'm just going to go over to a tree, because I want to add in that scripts. What am I doing? Sprites. So whenever you want to do a new sprite for something, always go to sprites. Don't be me at the very start and doing objects. When I actually get started, I'll fast forward it. Where's tree? Where is tree? Where the is the tree? Huh? Oh, there we go. I want to duplicate, not rename. I'm gonna do sprite tree. Because this tree is gonna be more of like a ball-esque tree. Open editor, edit image. ungo everything of what I kind of did there. I like that. I don't mind that. I kind of like the coloring. I mean, it probably could be a lot better, but you know, I don't really care. It's different. If it looks shit, that's fine. Anyway, so I went with more of like a, what do they call them? The red mahogany trees. So whenever fall hits, their trees, the leaves that fall from the tree are more of like a reddish, pinkish, almost velvet-like coloring. Whenever I was at the cemetery, it was like all sorts of different leaf colors that were falling. So, that's what I was like, I really like the red coloring so much that I kind of want to just implement that. Does that mean that's what the she's based off? No, this is a random ash tree. But you kind of get the general gist. So, I like that a lot, actually. I'm going to save it. So I probably will have this as the, tree. I'm surprised it has not updated the actual sprite yet. Don't know why that's the case. That's weird. That's not supposed to be the case, but whatever. So yeah, that's gonna be more of the full quote-unquote version. I'll probably change the bottom of the sprite. The reason why I did that so it looks a lot more blended in when it came to being on like the normal grass. But yeah. So there's a lot of things that I learned / I implemented to just kind of make it easier on myself. Like I chose the colors first. I put the colors on the side, and then I could just, whenever I got done with all of that I felt like I liked, then I went over and I pretty much what was it? Paint color. What's the tool called? Color picker. And I just had that over here in the history and just went ham on changing or doing what I wanted to do. And of course, for guys that are wondering, the outline is not black, but it's actually like really dark brown. So yeah, just to kind of give you ideas. Like you don't always have to go with black or white. So in this case, I kind of blended in the colors a bit more with like a really darker color, but I went with brown still, so it kind of fades in really well with other things. I think this is black still, actually. This might be black. Yeah, that's black. But around the trunk and like that, and the actual like branches inside the tree itself is more of a darker brown. But anyway, yeah, that's all I really wanted to do for at least the devlog here. There's more I could really go on about and talk about, but realistically, as the reason why I redid this video, everything was over the place. But even so, we're actually a lot longer video wise than the first devlog. But everything is a lot more concise and more into sections, just kind of explain specific stuff at certain times. Now, I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do for the outro here, so we're just kind of, I'll just kind of re-go over some things I want to mention. Honestly, I think there's going to be some people that will probably not like the fact that I talked about AI, or even used AI to an extent. I don't think AI is necessarily the most evil thing in the world, but I think there should be some moderation of using it. There's, again, nuance to everything, and when it comes to the AI, it's a helpful tool that you should not ignore, but you shouldn't always use it. That's all I can really say about AI. Now, could things change in the future? Yes. Could AI end up, if AI bubble pop and then AI is pretty much and utterly useless and not really usable? Sure. It could be. I could be. Like, I don't really have much I could really say, realistically, when it comes to that scenario. Like, we don't know what's going to end up happening in the future to anything, really. So, to me, that's like, if AI stills in the future, use it as a tool, but don't always use it fully for everything. But if AI no longer happens, then well, you best get reading to the documentation, I guess. To me, I've learned a lot. Even like the fact of AI helped me learn a lot more than I think I probably would have if AI wasn't a thing. There are certain things that AI helped me create a path for me to learn and to continue onward. And I think the biggest thing that helps me with certain things, like I eventually learned how to work with scripts. It can help me out of some problem solving situations. Now, it also helped me learn that I shouldn't always use it, and I need to learn certain things for myself. But also helped me figure out certain things that I would have not known that I could look into or go for. For example, BLXR for making sound effects. So, again, I mean, I probably could have looked it up online, but sometimes you gotta have to give credit for credit is due. It's a lot quicker to find what you need sometimes through AI. Not all the time, but sometimes. Now, after a certain point, I stopped relying on AI until I completely stopped working on anything when it came to the game project as well as the Devlog 2. So that's kind of like where I'm at right now when it comes to AI. Like, I pretty much haven't really been using it. The only time I used it was to kind of give like a showcase example of what I was visualizing. And the developer, me talking about AI, what's the best way of saying it? He didn't really go off. It was just more of he made a stance on AI. That he wasn't really going to be using AI. And he was going to be like going away from AI. Yeah, so they're not a fan of using AI of any kind of art, including voice acting quality is still kind of bad, and morally it's also questionable. So that's what they personally said. Granted, I mean, I wasn't saying using AI or you should use that for the idea. I was just more visualizing of what I was thinking. Granted, I don't think you want to have a car with 6 wheels. But anyway. It's just like that. I use AI as more of like a visualization slash learning tool more than creating stuff for me. That's probably gonna last time I'll really talk about AI. I think it would be obvious if I was using AI. Like, actually extremely obvious if I was ended up using AI. Like, there's a lot of things to this code that it's like, you probably could find issues with, or not working. Or actually, maybe it is working and that's better than AI that doesn't work, I guess. I'm not entirely certain how people figure out if someone uses AI or not, but I could safely say that that is not the case with this project. Yes, I did try not to use AI to do everything. And again, it's just mostly to focus on what I was going for. Anyway, enough of me blabbering about the two-letter word that ruffles a lot of feathers. I don't think there's really much else to note at this point in time. There's some weird shenanigans going on right now with Game Maker just due to the fact with the recent update. But I think I'll be fine. It's just more of getting used to this like new like form of like working on the code because I think there's a setting that depends upon what you went for will determine how it looks. It's not. It's just not really too much of a difference. It's just visualization wise what it looks like. I'm just gonna have to get used to it. That's all of how it looks, which can sometimes be annoying, but it's not the end of the world. Anyway, in terms of like the actual project itself, I don't really know what I'll fully do. I probably will implement some additions or changes to the random room 3 here. So there will be some changes or additions for this room. We'll see if I go with the original plan I had. But there's going to be a lot of things that I still want to do, and it will determine how things proceed. There probably will be some changes to how enemies spawn in this room. And then I'll continue working on more rooms. Kinda get like a few more sets of random rooms, and then I'll probably end up ending off with something. I don't know. I probably won't have an exact end to it, but I'll probably, again, I'll just focus on what I have, what I want to work on for the Trello to at least get to the next update. That's the main goal. Because at that point, I would say a lot of like the progression of the game to an extent, in terms of like going through rooms, would be done. And I could easily make it so that the release version of this next update, regardless of what I do, will probably, I'll probably make it so that it's like an endless loop. That's probably what I end up doing. That's what I'm kind of thinking of. However that goes, I don't know. Anyway, that's enough for now for this devlog 2. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but there is a lot of things I wanted to mention, and that still hasn't gone through everything, realistically. And of course, there's a lot of changes and things I have to go back to. Like, I have to go back through all these levels, and whatever unless I either fix it, because there's some fix around for the filters and effects, or I have to wait for the next update to fix it. One or the other. So, we'll see what happens. That's something I'll probably wait on a different point in time, because I just want to mainly, even though I did mess around with the effects and like that, I have an idea of how I want to go for some rooms with that. I'll probably just continue on working on the rooms, whatever I decide to go for them, and hopefully kind of get a huge chunk done when it comes to the progression and, again, whatever I do eventually implement from the Trello of the ideas I had. I'm going to shut up now, though. If you guys did enjoy today's video, make sure you like, subscribe, /follow, and share below. Probably will be Discord if I'm actually able to do that. Until then, I'll see you guys all in the next video. Peace.